They say the worst kind of betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the ones you once called family. I never thought I'd understand that saying, until the night I invited everyone I loved to Kingswood Grill for what was supposed to be my 36th birthday dinner, and instead walked into the unravelling of my entire life. We were seated around a long oak table under warm lighting in a private upstairs room where the soft sound of piano music floated through the air and the crystal glasses sparkled like they belonged in some elegant dream. Brian, my husband of nearly 10 years, rested his hand gently on my shoulder and raised his glass. To the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. Happy birthday, Claire. I smiled, but inside I felt nothing. Across the table, my younger sister Vanessa fiddled with her water glass. She hadn't touched the champagne Brian had so carefully chosen. A small detail, but telling had I not already known what was about to unfold. Then, with practiced ease, Vanessa set her glass down and spoke into the soft hum of the room. "Before we toast," she said, "I have an announcement." My mother, Evelyn, who sat beside her, gave her hand a knowing squeeze and smiled like she'd been waiting for this moment. Vanessa's voice was calm, her words steady. "I'm pregnant." Time stalled. You could hear the silverware pause mid-air. Then came the second blow. "And Brian is the father." I felt his fingers press down slightly on my shoulder, not in remorse but in anticipation. The staff froze at the threshold, unsure whether to continue serving or flee. Everyone braced for the inevitable scene. A shattered glass, a screaming wife, a weeping mess. But I didn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, I lifted my champagne, took a slow sip, and turned to Vanessa as if she'd just told me the weather. "Well," I said, voice unwavering. "That's interesting. Very interesting indeed." My mother leaned in, her tone sharp and rehearsed. "Claire, please don't make a scene." I set my glass down carefully, then opened my clutch and pulled out a pale cream envelope, the kind you only bring when you're holding a trump card. "Oh, don't worry, Mother," I said with a soft smile. "A scene would be inappropriate, but since we're sharing news, I have a little announcement of my own." I placed the envelope gently on the table and looked from my husband to my sister and then to the woman who raised us, always quick to see my faults, but somehow blind to Vanessa's manipulations. For 3 years, I blamed myself. I thought maybe I just wasn't trying hard enough to get pregnant. That something was wrong with me. But then I started to wonder, what if it wasn't me? I unfolded the medical report from St. Joseph's Fertility Clinic and held it so they could all see. According to Dr. Bennett, my dear husband Brian has a zoospermia. 0 sperm count, not low. 0. A heavy silence fell over the room, the kind that carries the weight of truth finally spoken. Vanessa's face turned ashen. Brian's hand vanished from my shoulder. "You want to see the test date?" I offered, turning to Brian. "Last month, right around when Vanessa stopped drinking wine." I stood, collected my envelope, and looked him in the eye. "Don't worry, I double-checked. 2 clinics, 2 doctors, same result. You want to keep lying, Brian? Or do you want me to show them the rest?" He said nothing, and for the first time in years I felt completely clear. 6 weeks before my birthday dinner, before the champagne glasses and the cruel announcement that shattered what was left of my trust, I was sitting alone in the home office I had spent years turning into my sanctuary. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind where the ticking of the wall clock seemed to echo louder than usual, and even the sunlight spilling through the window felt like it was intruding. I wasn't looking for anything, at least not consciously. But perhaps that's how the truth likes to show itself, when you least expect it and when it hurts the most. Brian and I shared an iPad, a practical decision, I had thought, and he often used it to stream news or check his emails late at night. That day it was lying unlocked on the armchair beside his desk. I don't remember what made me glance at the screen, only that I did, and what I saw changed everything. It was an open email thread between him and Vanessa. The subject line was blank, but the message burned itself into my memory the moment my eyes met the words, We need to be more careful. C is getting suspicious. That was it. Just one sentence. No affection, no signature. Just a warning. One that reduced me to a single initial. Not Claire, not your sister, but simply C. Like I was some inconvenient obstacle to be dealt with, not the woman who had welcomed Vanessa into our home more times than I could count. I stared at that email for what felt like forever, frozen in place, trying to convince myself it could mean something else. Anything else. But deep down, I already knew better. That message wasn't vague, it was calculated. And it didn't feel like the beginning of something. It felt like the middle of something I had refused to see. The next morning, I called Angela. She was my oldest friend, the kind of woman who always knew when to ask the right questions and, more importantly, when not to. I told her I needed to see her, that it couldn't wait, and I needed her to promise she wouldn't say a word until we were face to face. 20 minutes later, we sat tucked away in the back corner of Café Willow, a place we'd both loved since our 20s. Quiet, discreet, and far from the eyes and ears of anyone who might know my family. I showed her the email, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly she leaned back and let out a breath. "This could mean a lot of things, Claire," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. I pointed to the timestamp. 11:47 p.m. "Tell me why my sister is emailing my husband just before midnight," I asked quietly. Angela didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. After that, something shifted inside me. Not rage, not yet, but a deep and steady resolve. For 3 years, Brian and I had tried to start a family. Month after month of disappointment, of appointments, of medication, of tears. I cried alone in the bathroom while he reassured me, told me to be patient, told me that stress was the real problem. But now those words twisted in my memory, no longer comforting. They were weapons, carefully wielded to keep me in the dark. That week, I made an appointment at Eastbridge Fertility Clinic, the same one Brian insisted on managing alone in the past. Every result, every form, every piece of paper had gone through him. He told me it was just easier that way, that he'd take care of it. But I was done letting other people filter the truth for me. When I arrived, the receptionist greeted me with a warm smile that quickly turned to confusion. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, "we haven't seen you in quite some time. I thought your husband usually handled everything." I kept my own smile calm and deliberate. "He does," I replied. "But today I'd like to handle it myself. I believe I'm legally entitled to my own records. And his, considering we're listed as joint patients." She hesitated, just for a moment, before nodding. "Of course, let me print those for you." 15 minutes later, I sat in my car, hands trembling as I flipped through the manila envelope. My results were all there, regular, healthy, exactly what I had been told. But Brian's? There were no results, no lab work, no follow-ups, no history of him ever getting tested. Nothing. That night, I told Angela everything. We sat in her kitchen, the soft glow of her under-cabinet lights casting long shadows as I laid out every piece of what I'd found. 3 years, I whispered. 3 years of trying, and he never once got tested. He just let me believe it was my fault. Angela looked stunned, then furious. But why would he do that? Why lie? I didn't have to think about the answer, because as long as I thought it was me, he didn't have to explain anything. The medications, the mood swings, the isolation, it all became part of the process. He controlled the narrative, the guilt, the hope. I pulled out my old leather planner, the one Brian always teased me for using instead of a phone. Flipping to the back, I revealed a list of names, times and dates. So I scheduled an appointment, told him it was a romantic dinner, got him to drink a glass of wine laced with a sleep aid. Nothing dangerous, just enough to knock him out for a few hours. And while he slept, the clinic collected the sample. Angela stared at me like she was seeing someone new. Claire, that's calculated. Not as calculated as faking infertility to avoid accountability, I said quietly. And when the results came back exactly as I suspected, complete infertility, I did it again at a different clinic just to be sure. Angela poured us both a glass of wine, her hands slightly shaking. So, what now? I picked up my phone and opened a photo. Vanessa leaving the same fertility clinic the day I picked up the second set of results. Now we play their game. Vanessa's been avoiding wine, claiming antibiotics. She's pregnant, I'm sure of it, but here's the twist. I swiped through more photos. One of her meeting a man outside a bookstore. Another of them at a late-night diner. Another of them embracing beside a silver sedan. His name's Daniel Burke, her ex from college. I found him on social media. They've been quietly reconnecting for months. Angela's eyes widened. So the baby might not be Brian's after all. That's the irony, I said with a bitter smile. She doesn't know he can't have kids either. He's been lying to her just like he lied to me. I pulled out a cream-coloured invitation. This is for my birthday. I'm going to let them think they've won, let them come, smile, celebrate, and then I'm going to dismantle every lie they've told. One by one dot. Angela's voice was low, almost reverent. Claire, this isn't revenge. This is war. I looked her dead in the eye. They didn't just break my heart, Angela. They broke my sense of self, my sanity, my worth as a woman. This isn't just about exposing them. It's about making sure they can never rewrite this story in their favour. Not ever again. The day after I confirmed Brian's infertility for the second time, I sat in my living room in absolute stillness, letting the weight of the truth settle into the cracks of my bones. There was no comfort in being right, only clarity, sharp and unrelenting, like the morning sun piercing through drawn curtains after a sleepless night. I wasn't grieving a marriage anymore. I was mourning the version of myself who believed in it. For weeks I had told myself I needed more proof, not because I didn't already believe what I'd seen, but because I knew that if I was going to confront the two people who had betrayed me most, I had to do so with such certainty, such precision that they couldn't weasel their way out of it with a tearful apology or another fabricated excuse. I didn't want confrontation, I wanted consequence. One morning, as I was leaving the second clinic with Brian's test results tucked securely in my handbag, I saw Vanessa. She didn't see me, but I recognized her instantly. The same casual confidence in her step, the same oversized scarf she always used to hide in plain sight. She was walking briskly out of the same building I had just left, clutching a white envelope. At first, I thought she might be visiting someone, but then I saw her pause to press her hand protectively over her stomach, and something inside me clicked into place. Vanessa was pregnant, and she wasn't there for someone else. For days after that, I watched her carefully at family dinners and social gatherings, and every time the wine bottle came around, she passed with a polite smile and a murmured excuse. Antibiotics, a headache, early mornings. But I knew the truth. She was hiding something, just as Brian had hidden his. Angela, ever the voice of reason and revenge alike, encouraged me to dig deeper. So I did what any heartbroken, humiliated woman with a sharp mind and an internet connection would do. I followed the patterns. I looked through Vanessa's social media posts, noting the subtle clues she left behind, the vague captions, the repeated visits to Eastern Cafe, the likes from someone named Daniel Burke. The name triggered a distant memory. Vanessa's ex-boyfriend from college, the one she claimed was too simple for her fast-paced life. But apparently, simple had become appealing again. I found his profile within minutes. His face hadn't changed much, still boyishly handsome with a cleft chin and warm brown eyes. What had changed was his activity, cryptic posts about second chances, unexpected blessings, and quiet gratitude. More telling than the posts, though, were the photos. Untagged but not hidden, showing him meeting Vanessa in quiet corners of town, outside bookstores, in parking lots, slipping through shadows as if their meetings weren't meant to be seen. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Not until I was certain. So I did what I knew I had to do. I started collecting. Every receipt, every email, every message, every piece of evidence that painted the picture they had tried so hard to blur. One afternoon while Brian was at work, I accessed our joint home computer. I knew his passwords. He never thought I'd have a reason to use them. In a hidden folder labeled tax documents, I found what I wasn't even looking for: copies of wire transfers, digital receipts, and one particular bank statement showing $50,000 transferred to Vanessa's personal account just 3 months prior. I cross-checked it with my own financial records and my blood ran cold. The loan had been taken out in my name. I printed everything. I organized it into labeled folders. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I contacted a lawyer. Ryland Matthews was calm, experienced, and meticulous. The kind of man who didn't blink at drama because he'd seen worse. After reviewing the evidence, he looked at me across his desk and said, "Claire, I'm not exaggerating when I say this goes beyond divorce. What you're describing could lead to civil and criminal liability, fraud, embezzlement, identity theft." His words didn't scare me. They empowered me. The following week, I met Daniel Burke in a small coffee shop near the university where he worked. I had messaged him privately, phrasing it carefully, explaining that I needed to speak with him, not as Vanessa's sister, but as a woman seeking truth. He was already seated when I arrived, nervously turning a paper cup in his hands. He looked up, his expression guarded. "I'm Claire," I said, sliding into the seat across from him, "and I think you already know why I'm here." I showed him a photo, the one of him and Vanessa outside the fertility clinic. His face paled. "She told me she was single," he said. "She told me the baby might not be mine, but she didn't say it couldn't be his." "She didn't say that because she doesn't know Brian is infertile," I replied, "and because she needed you to believe it was a possibility." I handed him a document, a request for paternity testing, already pre-filled with the details he'd need. "You don't have to sign this," I told him, "but if you want to know the truth and protect your future, I suggest you do." After a long pause, Daniel signed. Meanwhile, back home, Brian's world was beginning to crumble. His co-workers had started avoiding him. An anonymous email, crafted carefully with copies of financial reports, doctored spreadsheets, and screenshots of suspicious transactions, had landed in the inboxes of several board members at his firm. I didn't need to attach my name to it. The evidence spoke for itself. Angela called me the next day. "Vanessa just showed up at your mother's house," she said, crying, hysterical, playing the victim. I wasn't surprised. Vanessa had always had a flair for dramatics when things slipped out of her control. I drove to the neighborhood but didn't go inside right away. I sat in my car, watching through the front window as she curled into our mother's arms, sobbing like the world had turned against her, never once acknowledging that she had set the fire herself. I walked in without knocking. "You're trying to ruin my life," Vanessa shrieked, mascara streaking her face. "No," I replied, voice steady. "You ruined your life the moment you decided to destroy mine. I'm just holding up the mirror." In the weeks that followed my confrontation with Daniel and the quiet unraveling of Brian's lies, I found myself waking each day not with dread, but with a sense of measured purpose. There was a calmness that settled into my bones, not born from peace but from clarity, the kind of clarity that comes only after you've accepted the truth and decided what you're going to do with it. I no longer needed comfort. I needed strategy. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to plead or beg or throw accusations into the wind, hoping someone would catch them and care. No, I was going to dismantle everything, carefully, quietly, and thoroughly, the way a woman does when she's spent years being underestimated. That's when I planned the dinner. I chose the Grantham Club, a neutral ground with white tablecloths, discreet staff, and, most importantly, a state-of-the-art audio-visual system that I knew would serve me well. I framed the gathering as a family reconciliation, a chance to clear the air after the misunderstanding at my birthday. I used words like healing and closure, knowing they were the kinds of phrases my mother craved and Vanessa could twist into public sympathy if things spiraled. Brian, ever the performer, readily agreed. I imagine he thought it was his chance to control the narrative again, to remind me I was still the wounded party, the one who had overreacted, the one who didn't know the full story. But I did. I knew the whole story, and I had the receipts. In the days leading up to that dinner, I worked in silence. While Brian slept in the guest room, an arrangement he never questioned, likely chalking it up to emotional distance, I sat at the dining table sorting documents, labeling photos, and syncing video files. I had collected so much: surveillance footage from my home's security system, copies of bank transfers, emails with falsified headers, and most damning of all, a video from his own office, a conversation between Brian and Vanessa planning how they'd ease me into the truth about their child. It wasn't just betrayal, it was orchestration. Meanwhile, Angela stayed close. She brought coffee, guarded my quiet, and helped me cross-reference timelines with a precision I hadn't realized I needed. She also reached out to a contact she had in media law. Not to leak anything yet, but to make sure that when the time came, I'd know what I could and couldn't say, and more importantly, what I could show. As each day passed, the pieces fell into place. I made arrangements with my lawyer to begin divorce proceedings. I froze all joint accounts, submitted fraud reports for the loan taken out in my name, and began compiling a formal packet for Brian's company's legal department, which included spreadsheets he had manipulated, vendor invoices routed through ghost accounts, and email threads showing his attempts to cover his tracks. Everything tied neatly together. He had no idea I'd been collecting it all right under his nose while he played the victim in the tragedy he created. Vanessa, in the meantime, was spiraling. Angela kept me informed. She was losing brand partnerships, sponsors were backing away, and the online community that once adored her relatable luxury lifestyle was starting to question the gaps in her stories. Word was getting out. Quietly, but steadily. The baby bump she once flaunted so proudly had now become a shield she used to avoid events, a justification for seclusion, a distraction from the uncomfortable questions about timelines and paternity. I had sent Daniel a copy of the legal paternity form, and to his credit, he responded quickly. The results came back, undeniable and unarguable. He was the father, not Brian, not even possibly Brian. When I received the email confirming the results, I didn't cry, I didn't laugh. I simply printed the document and added it to the growing file in my leather-bound folder marked Truth. But there was one last card I hadn't played yet. One evening, while Brian was out, I drove to my mother's house. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to observe, to see if her loyalty to Vanessa had wavered at all. As expected, she opened the door with that same tight-lipped composure, ushered me in like nothing had happened, and offered tea I didn't want. She launched into a carefully worded lecture about family resilience and how everyone makes mistakes, barely concealing her real agenda to preserve the family's image. She didn't ask about the loan in my name or the money that had vanished into Vanessa's account. She didn't ask why Brian was no longer sleeping in our bedroom. She didn't ask about my pain, because she already knew, and she had chosen her side. So I stood, thanked her for the tea I didn't touch, and said, "You might want to remind Vanessa that credit card companies don't like unpaid prenatal bills, especially when they're tied to someone else's insurance." Her face fell, just for a second, but it was enough. The next day, I dropped off copies of the financial documents and paternity results with Ryland. He glanced at the stack, flipped through a few pages, and nodded. "This is ironclad," he said. "You're not just exposing betrayal, you're blowing open a pattern of fraud, deception, and financial abuse. They're not going to see this coming." And they didn't. As the final piece of my plan, I handed Mary, a family acquaintance with a subtle social media presence but a surprisingly wide network, a discreet request. All she had to do was attend the upcoming dinner, blend in with the family, and be ready with her phone, just in case. She smiled. You want this streamed, don't you? Only if it gets messy, I said. It will, she replied. With people like them, it always does. The night of the dinner arrived with a crisp chill in the air, the kind that makes your breath visible and your heartbeat louder than usual. I arrived early, not because I was nervous, those days were gone, but because I needed the space to breathe before the storm I had been carefully orchestrating unfolded. The Grantham Club's private dining hall was pristine, dressed in muted tones of cream and mahogany, and as I walked past the neatly arranged chairs and the flickering candlelight on each table, I could almost hear the echo of my former self, whispering not to go through with it. But I didn't pause. I had spent too long being silent, too long shrinking myself to protect the comfort of others, and tonight was not about comfort. It was about truth. Vanessa arrived first, wrapped in an ivory maternity dress that skimmed just enough of her growing stomach to suggest delicacy and defiance at once. Her face was pale but painted, her expression unreadable except for the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She glanced around the room before settling into a seat without acknowledging me. I'm only here because Mom insisted, she said coolly. I didn't reply. There would be time for words later, plenty of them. One by one, the rest arrived. My mother, impeccably dressed as always, walked in on Brian's arm, her expression one of weary composure, as if she were the martyr in a war she didn't start. Behind them came Mary, acting as the innocent bystander, and a few extended relatives who had no idea they were walking into a reckoning. Brian avoided my gaze, but I could sense his discomfort in the way he adjusted his collar and scanned the room for a seat as far from mine as possible. When everyone was settled and the first course had been served, I stood up and gently tapped my spoon to the side of my glass. The room quieted quickly, all eyes turning toward me, expecting either an apology or another emotional outburst, both of which I had no intention of delivering. I want to thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steady, though my chest carried the weight of what I was about to reveal. And I'd like to begin by offering an apology, not for what I said at my birthday dinner, but for not saying enough. There was a brief flicker of relief on Vanessa's face, and my mother offered a small, approving nod, as if she believed I had finally come to my senses. But then I reached into my handbag, withdrew a small remote, and clicked it. Behind me, the large flat screen on the wall flickered to life. A digital document appeared, clear, clinical, and impossible to misinterpret. This, I said, is a paternity test. It was completed last week. The name on the sample belongs to Daniel Burke, and the result, as you'll see highlighted in yellow, confirms that he is the father of Vanessa's unborn child. A wave of shock rolled through the room. My mother's fork clattered against her plate, Vanessa let out a strangled gasp, and Brian's face turned to stone. Vanessa stood so abruptly her water glass tipped, sending ice scattering across the table. "You can't do this," she cried. "This is private." "I already did," I said calmly, clicking again. This time, photos appeared. Vanessa and Daniel embracing outside a bookstore, exiting the fertility clinic together, and smiling at a holiday party. Images time-stamped and arranged in a neat sequence that left no room for doubt. "You remember Daniel, don't you?" I continued, turning to Brian. "The man Vanessa dated before you ever touched her. The man she's been seeing while pretending the child is yours." Brian pushed his chair back so violently it screeched against the floor. "You told me he was out of your life," he snapped. "She told everyone what they needed to hear," I replied, "just like you told me I was the reason we couldn't have children." The room buzzed with disbelief, whispers building like static. My mother's voice cut through it. "Claire, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself." "No," I said, locking eyes with her. "What's embarrassing is your obsession with preserving a lie. So, let's make sure everyone understands the cost of it." Click. A new slide appeared. Bank statements showing funds transferred from Brian's company account to one labelled under my name, followed by transfers to Vanessa's. I walked them through it gently but firmly, explaining how Brian had embezzled company funds to support not only his affair, but the purchase of the very house my mother now lived in. The house she had so often claimed was her sanctuary. The blood drained from her face. "Company funds," she whispered. "Falsified reports, fraudulent loans, and corporate theft," I said, clicking again to show the relevant documentation. "All under review by his firm's legal team. Oh, and Vanessa, you may want to start thinking about how to explain that insurance fraud to Daniel's attorney." Vanessa lunged at me, but Mary, who had been filming quietly from the far end of the table, stepped in. "Don't," she said sharply, holding her phone firm. "You've done enough." "You're ruining everything," Vanessa screamed, tears streaking her foundation. "You've always been jealous of me." "No," I answered, my voice calm as steel. "I've always been your scapegoat, and tonight I'm just done." I turned to Brian. "Your company's lawyers will be in touch. They've asked me to hand over the original documents tomorrow morning." He sank back into his seat, burying his face in his hands, the facade finally crumbling under the weight of his own deceit. My mother reached for Vanessa's trembling hand, but even she looked uncertain now, unsure where to place her loyalty when the truth had scorched every surface. And then came the final blow. Click. A video began to play, grainy security footage from Brian's office, recorded on a small device I had hidden weeks before. The voices were unmistakable, his and Vanessa's, calmly discussing how they would announce the pregnancy, how they would frame me as emotionally unstable, and how Brian would gain sympathy in the eyes of family and friends. "How did you get this?" Brian whispered, pale with panic. "You really should have updated your passwords," I replied, "and maybe checked your office for bugs." Vanessa was sobbing now, my mother sat frozen, and Brian looked like a man watching his whole world collapse in slow motion. I gathered my bag and folder and turned to leave. "Oh, and Vanessa." I paused at the door. "Daniel's lawyer will be contacting you soon. Something about paternity fraud and emotional damages." "You can't prove—" "The test is legally binding," I said over my shoulder, "and the financial records are already with the authorities. But please, try to deny it. I'm sure the press would love to hear your side." I walked out, letting the weight of the moment settle behind me like dust after demolition. My phone buzzed as I reached the parking lot. A message from Ryland. "Company confirmed. Settlement talks to begin Monday. You've done it." I stood beneath the quiet sky, breathing in the night air like it was my first breath in years. I didn't smile. Not yet. But I felt something stir inside me. Not revenge, not even victory. Just freedom. And that was enough. I didn't sleep the night after the dinner. I didn't cry either. Instead, I sat in the stillness of my apartment, lit only by the warm flicker of a single lamp, and listened to the city hum below me, as if life outside could carry on untouched, unaware of the devastation I had left behind just hours earlier. But I knew. The storm I set in motion wasn't done. Not yet. Its shockwaves were only beginning to ripple outward. By morning, Mary had uploaded edited clips from the dinner. Nothing scandalous. Just enough to confirm the family had imploded and the lies had finally surfaced. Her quiet network of friends, bloggers, and well-positioned acquaintances ensured that within hours, the truth had reached the very people Vanessa and my mother had spent years trying to impress. And while I had no desire to revel in their downfall, I felt no remorse either. For the first time in years, I wasn't protecting anyone but myself. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Angela. Vanessa just tried to get into the West Hill Country Club. They revoked her membership on the spot. She broke down in the lobby, mascara, screaming, the works. I didn't even blink. I simply replied, "She always did love an audience." I spent the rest of the day sorting through the remaining paperwork with Ryland. The evidence I had provided was more than sufficient. Not only had Brian embezzled funds and committed identity fraud, but he had also manipulated tax records and falsified internal reports for over 2 years. and the financial team at his firm had enough to press criminal charges. They didn't want a quiet resignation. They wanted a full public inquiry. They wanted to make an example of him, and I had given them everything they needed. Angela arrived at my apartment with wine, takeout, and the kind of loyalty that doesn't falter even when the walls around your life collapse. She scrolled through the news while I packed up more documents for Ryland. "You're trending," she said, not unkindly. "Maternity queen caught in paternity scandal." I smiled faintly, and here I thought I'd be remembered as the woman who couldn't have children. The next morning I got a call from Brian's assistant. Her voice cautious, almost apologetic. She let me know that the board had frozen his assets pending legal review and that all company cards, including the ones he had secretly given Vanessa, were now inactive. I thanked her, then calmly called the florist that Vanessa used and cancelled her weekly deliveries. Petty? Perhaps, but necessary. Vanessa's phone calls became increasingly erratic. When I stopped answering, she started showing up. First at Angela's, then at my mother's, and finally pounding on the lobby door of my building, screaming about how I was ruining her life and how she didn't deserve any of this. My doorman, God bless him, politely escorted her away. But the most telling moment came 3 days later, when my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced, her face drawn and exhausted, the sharp pride that always defined her replaced by something I couldn't quite name, regret, perhaps, though that might have been wishful thinking. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me without waiting for an invitation, as she had done my whole life. I closed the door quietly and stood, arms crossed, as she paced the living room like it might help her gather courage. "What you've done," she said eventually, "is unforgivable." "What I've done," I echoed, "or what I revealed?" "She's your sister, Claire," she snapped, "and she's falling apart." She was falling apart long before I exposed her lies. You just refused to see it. Her hands trembled as she clutched her bag. "You've always been so cold, so guarded, just like your father." I swallowed the urge to laugh. "The man who walked out and never looked back. That's your barometer for emotional worth." She didn't answer. I sat down across from her, slow and deliberate. "Tell me, Mom. Was it when I chose work over weddings? Was it when I stopped asking for your approval? Or was it when I started succeeding without your help? Is that when you stopped seeing me as a daughter and started seeing me as a threat?" She flinched, just slightly, but didn't deny it. Before she could speak again, Angela burst through the door holding a stack of papers. She froze when she saw my mother, then continued without apology. "Claire, the bank confirmed it. Brian took out a $50,000 loan in your name and transferred it directly to Vanessa's account 3 months ago." My mother gasped, her composure finally cracking. "No. She said she needed help with medical bills, the clinic, the insurance." "The insurance she wasn't supposed to be using anymore," I added, handing her a printed copy of the charges billed under Daniel's provider. "She forged dates, reused an old card, and tried to claim prenatal care for a pregnancy she told him didn't exist. That's fraud, Mom. And you helped her do it." My mother's knees buckled slightly as she sat down, staring at the documents as though they might rearrange themselves into something less damning. "You should warn her," I said gently. "Her cards are going to start bouncing soon." She looked at me, suddenly aged, the full weight of what she had ignored, or enabled, finally settling in. "You're going to regret this vindictiveness," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "I regret every year I spent trying to prove I was worthy of your love. I regret believing I had to earn what should have been freely given. But this I will never regret." When she left, she didn't say goodbye. I didn't expect her to. That evening, Ryland called. "Claire, it's worse than we thought. There are multiple forged invoices and wire transfers. The company is filing a civil suit. And the state wants your cooperation on the criminal charges. They're calling this organized financial deception. And you're listed as the primary witness." I didn't hesitate. "What do you need?" "Everything," he said. Every file, every statement, every login you've ever used. I reached for the USB I had been updating every night for weeks. It's all here. And that night, alone again in the quiet of my apartment, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not because of loss, but because of release. I didn't mourn the man who never respected me, or the sister who envied and betrayed me. I mourned the version of myself that believed loyalty would protect me, that thought being good and kind was enough to be loved. But in those tears, there was no weakness, only a reckoning. Because sometimes when everything you've built on lies comes crashing down, you don't run from the wreckage. You rise from it, stronger, clearer, and finally free. The moving truck pulled away just after sunrise, leaving nothing behind but a clean driveway and a silence that felt, for once, like peace. I stood at the edge of the walkway, keys to my new apartment in one hand and a hot coffee in the other, breathing in the morning like it was something sacred. There were no remnants of Brian's cologne on my furniture, no old photos of family holidays I had to pretend to remember fondly, no echoes of Vanessa's laughter that once felt like betrayal in the walls. For the first time in years, everything in this space, from the hardwood floors to the empty wine rack, was mine. Angela arrived minutes later with a bottle of housewarming wine, her arms full of groceries and her voice as steady as ever. "This place is gorgeous," she said, stepping inside and glancing around at the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sunlight pouring in unapologetically. "Feels like freedom." "It is," I said simply, taking the wine from her and setting it on the counter beside a stack of unopened letters, one of which bore the firm seal from the state attorney's office. We poured 2 glasses and sat together on the plush new couch, no longer the old leather sectional that had witnessed too many nights of cold silence and forced smiles. I took a long sip, then glanced at my phone, where a notification was flashing. Brian Whitaker sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Charges include embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft. Angela raised an eyebrow as I read the headline aloud. 8 years. Seems light, she said. "The money was never the point," I replied, tracing the rim of my glass. "It was the lies. The way he made me feel like I was broken, like my pain was just hormonal, like my suspicion was just insecurity. It was how he twisted everything to make me believe I was the one failing." She nodded, quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone. "Vanessa had the baby yesterday." "I know," I said. "Daniel's lawyer called me." "Did they do the DNA test?" "They did it the moment the cord was cut. It's his. He's already filing for full custody. Cited her unstable behavior, the fraud, the manipulation." Angela leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Your mother must be thrilled." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Wouldn't know. Haven't heard from her since she offered me money to drop the charges." "She offered you what?" I nodded. "Said it would protect the family name. She's still playing queen when the whole kingdom's in ashes." "She chose her side," I said, reaching down to a box marked personal, keep, and pulling out a stack of old photographs that Mary had dropped off earlier. "Now she gets to live with it." Inside the envelope was a letter. Not from my mother, not from Vanessa, but from Brian's sister. She had found it cleaning out his old office and thought I had a right to see it. It was dated 3 years ago and written in Vanessa's handwriting. The words were careful, but the intention was clear. "She's too cold, too focused on work. You deserve more. We deserve more." "They were planning this," I said, voice low but steady. "For years." Angela didn't say anything, just reached over and took the wine bottle to refill our glasses. And now, they have nothing. Brian's in prison. Vanessa lost custody of the baby. My mother's house is under seizure as part of the financial settlement. "Karma," she said, raising her glass. "Quite the architect," I agreed. Later that afternoon, Mary arrived with a small potted plant and a thick envelope. "You'll want to see this," she said, handing it over. "It's from the clinic. And there's something else." I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter on elegant stationery. "Dear Ms. Whitaker," it began, "we were deeply moved by your story and your recent donation. We would be honoured to offer you our services free of charge whenever you're ready to explore motherhood. On your own terms." Angela turned toward me. "Are you going to do it?" "Maybe," I said, carefully folding the letter, "but not because I need a child to feel complete, not to fill the void they left, and not because I'm expected to, only if I choose to, on my own terms, for once." That evening we sat near the window, watching the city turn gold in the light of the setting sun. Angela and Mary chatted about weekend plans, and for the first time in a long time, I felt surrounded by something real. Not the performative family I was born into, but the family I chose, built from loyalty, honesty, and love that didn't come with conditions. My phone buzzed once more. An unknown number. I didn't need to guess. I declined the call and blocked it. "You know what I've learned from all this?" I asked, turning to the women who had stood by me through it all. They expected me to collapse. They expected me to fall to pieces, to forgive, to forget, to settle for whatever version of love they were willing to offer. "But you didn't," Angela said quietly. "No," I whispered. "Instead, I built a balcony, and now I just watch them fall." I raised my glass, not in bitterness, but in quiet triumph. "To karma." "To strength," Mary added. "To starting over," Angela said. And that night, as I stood before the mirror, pinning an old childhood photo of myself, fearless, joyful, untouched by betrayal, to the corner frame, I didn't think about revenge, or pain, or what I had lost. I thought about what I had found, my voice, my boundaries, my worth. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's reinvention. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. We tell real stories of betrayal, strength, and quiet triumph, because justice may come late, but it always comes.